Hi, I'm the political geek that is Martin Curtis, and this is Change from the Centre. You might remember, but a week ago, I published a video talking about the lessons that the UK political system needs to learn from the Iran war. And one of those was about the impact that oil price rises seem to have on our economy every time there's a conflict anywhere. And it seems I was a bit ahead of the game because the media picked up on the same issue on the 10th of March. Uh, they seem to have used the fact that oil prices went to over $100 a barrel as the point at which they felt like they've got a story. And just to give you a couple of examples, this is what the newspaper headlines were saying on that day. And this is what Sky's Ed Conway was doing on 10th of March as well. And it's worth saying, I really, really like Ed Conway. He does some really, really good analysis. But what I want to do in this video is talk a little bit about the difference between what the media are doing and what I'm trying to do here on Change from the Centre. And that includes a little bit of thought leadership. So going a little bit beyond just the fact that this is happening and commentating on this is happening, but to how do we deal with the issues? So if there's one thing that I would say our print media and our news media desperately lacks within the UK, it is thought leadership. And I'm sure they would push back and say that their job is to report the news. But actually, in the sensationalist way that they report our news, and especially politics, if that's all they do is help our political system to sink. And what's gone on around oil prices this week and the impact is a great, great example where they did some great stuff, to be fair. The analysis they did about why oil prices have gone to beyond $100 a barrel is a good example, but also the impact it has on people, talking about the fact that inflation is now forecast to stay at 3%, when before we were looking at 2%, which would have meant reductions in interest rates and more money in people's pockets. And of course, that's important, especially at a time where this phrase cost of living crisis is everywhere, and for good reason. But they didn't go beyond that and talk about how do we move forward, because there'll be good reason to talk about it next time there's a crisis. There'll be good reason to talk about it next time the Straits of Hormuz are closed, or next time there's issues around Russia and Ukraine that are worse than they are. So we need somebody to think differently and think about how do we get out of this? And that's what I'm trying to do within Change from the Centre. So when I talked about oil prices, I talked about the impact on people's purses and stuff like that. But I also talked about the idea I had of creating a sovereign green fund. So we start drilling in the North Sea again, we create a sovereign green fund, and we use the revenue from that fund to basically put solar on rooftops, both domestic and commercial, so that we drive down our reliance on oil, so that when we start to see these crises happening and when we start to see oil prices going like that again, then we start to get to a situation where it impacts on us less because we've done the right things. There's all sorts of other reasons why that makes sense. And I did some analysis this week about how much we could benefit from a sovereign green fund. And if we moved back to, or if we moved to the Norwegian model, and the Norwegians have got a sovereign wealth fund, which is where the idea of the green fund came from for me, we would create a huge amount of revenue that we could then use to good and to make our country green forever. And that would surely be a good thing. But the most important thing is the media aren't talking about it. And this is the sort of story we need to see. To be fair, there are other aspects of the media and what you could call the media that do. So we've got some great think tanks in this country. They do this sort of stuff all the time. There's a number of political websites that do it. Things like Conservative Home are great at it, and so is Labour List. But obviously they've got biases, which I try and keep away from, despite the fact that as you all know, as I've said before, I'm a One Nationist, so a former Conservative Party member, but one that's fallen out with the Conservative Party in the direction it's taken. Now, the point about thought leadership is not that it needs to be applied to the lessons learned from the Iran war, but that we need thought leadership right across the political spectrum. I can think of two areas of government policy where we desperately need original thinking, and that's around education and adult social care. And the point for me is it's okay for journalists to report and just continually report the bad stuff and the sensationalist stuff. And I don't have a problem with reporting that. The Mandelson affair, as an example, we desperately need to be better informed about and understand what went wrong. And that's for us to understand as well as politicians. But actually, isn't it right that we also ask journalists to talk about the way forward? How do we move beyond that? How do we stop Mandelson happening again? And I can think of other areas like I said, adult social care, but one in particular that I can talk about where we've got something coming up in a few months' time where we need some debate before it happens, and that's around the local elections. Now, these are happening in May, and I want to talk about two bits of statistics before I talk about the issue. The first is the most recent opinion polls. I looked at the YouGov poll before I came on air and started recording today, and the latest one had Reform at 23%, Greens and the Conservatives at 19%, and the Labour Party some way below them. So, that's pretty, that's pretty tight. And we're talking about here no party having more than 25% of the electorate with support. Now let's look at how big a ward is in a local council. A typical ward, the average size is 5,500 voters. And turnout in local elections, where you don't have a parliamentary election or a European election as we used to have on the same day, is pretty low. The average is about 35%. And sometimes it is a lot worse than that. So if you put those things all together, the latest opinion polls, the size of the wards, the projected low turnout, we're talking about councillors being elected to councils based on 25% of 25% of 5,500. So basically, in a ward of 5,500 electors, we're going to have people representing them where 343 people voted for them. And someone has got to pretend somewhere that these people have got a mandate. Even worse, we're going to have councils change control with political parties running them who got 25% of 25% of the electorate voting for them. These are not mandates. And we need to think about what we're doing. What I suspect is going to happen is that we're going to have this happen in the election. There'll be a lot of press about it. There'll be a lot of negative media about how bad it is and everything else. But there'll be no talk about how we move forwards. So when the general election happens and we have exactly the same thing happen, MPs elected with very, very small sections of the community voting for them, we're going to be in a bit of a crisis. And I would argue that proportional representation is the right way forward. And I would say actually a lot of people support me. I think at the last count, 44% of the electorate supported a move to proportional representation of some sort. That's 20% more than supports any single political party at the moment. And yet nobody's talking about it. And we're walking into, if it's not in these local elections, a potential constitutional crisis at the next general election without any debate, despite the fact that people know it's going to happen. So I hope you understand what I mean when I talk about thought leadership and the fact that we need debates about alternatives to where we're going, about how politics moves forward based on a positive agenda. So we don't just talk about the negative stuff all the time. That's certainly what I'm trying to do here on Change from the Centre. And if you like what I'm doing, please subscribe to the channel. If you've got any thoughts about areas where we do desperately need thought leadership, where we need some original thinking, put some comments against this video. It'd be great for me to see them. I always try and respond to comments. But if you've enjoyed it, that's the most important thing. And thank you very much for watching.